So the ACT includes Canberra and Parliament. So that means Parliament's going to be locked down, yeah?
Yeah.
And no one's going to notice.
Very funny.
It's really worrisome. Parliaments. It's like, I don't know, strange. Maybe not worrisome, but strange. That's for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So today's topic is the power of the finite and infinite possibilities that come within finite. It's a little bit of a paradigm shift that Hasidus and Torah tries to teach us. Sometimes we think that the more restrictions or limitations we have on us, the less free and the more finite we are. But sometimes that allows you to do much greater things. So I want to first learn a Mishnah. And after we learn the Mishnah, I want to get into a little bit of a Hasidic discussion on this topic, if we have time, depending on how much time allows. Okay? All right. So let me just share my screen. We were actually today going to be concluding the second chapter of Pirkei Avot. It's a very powerful. We already initiated this discussion yesterday. I'm sorry, last week. It's a very powerful discussion. Right at the end, by the name of Rabbi Tarfon. So Rabbi Tarfon, just to give you a little bit of a background. Last week I spoke a bit more about Rabbi Tarfon because he says these last two Mishnas. He was a very close friend of Rabbi Akiva. He initially was like a teacher to Rabbi Akiva, and eventually he considers himself more of a colleague. And that's the way it is, of course, in Torah study. You start off as a teacher, and then you end up learning mitalmida yosem mikulam. You start learning more and more from your students, but eventually you actually become more like colleagues to the students if the students are up to that level. So Rabbi Akiva starts off on somewhat of a lower level to Rabbi Tarfon, but eventually surpasses him in Torah study to a certain degree, and they become colleagues. There's lots of famous discussions that they have together. They were very good friends, but one of the most famous lines is in the tractate Makot, where we're told about, the Torah talks about sometimes people get a death penalty. There's certain things that the Torah is allowed to give a death penalty for. So the Mishnah over there says that if a Beth Din, a Sanhedrin, which is something which is not done today, by the way, put somebody to death, it's not done. It's not done today. It's not done even at the end of the Second Temple era. It stopped. Which these Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon lived at the end of the Second Temple and then the century after that. And the Mishnah says if a Beth Din kills a person once in 70 years, for the way it's called Misa, in that way as a punishment, then it's considered a murderous Beth Din. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon have a famous statement that they say that if we were the Sanhedrin, there would never ever be murders. In other words, we would never allow it to get to a point where somebody would be on such a level not murdered. And then some of their colleagues argued with them and said, okay, so you sound like you don't want to ever be able to use the death penalty. However, the death penalty, while it sounds like a great thing not to ever use the ability or the power of the death penalty, but ultimately it would cause sometimes more damage. And that's the conclusion of that discussion. So we don't know exactly what Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon answered to that, but that is their famous position. Last week I spoke about a story of Rabbi Tarfon, who was extremely wealthy, giving money to Rabbi Akiva to buy 2 cities, and he ends up using it to support yeshivot. In talking about the wealth of Rabbi Tarfon, I'll just say one more story about him. There's a famous story brought down in the Talmud that he owned many, 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 many vineyards. And in order to take care of all these vineyards and fields, he needed lots of employees. And most of the employees don't know who he was. It's like, the big boss of Coles. I don't know if there's even such a thing as a big boss. But if somebody that was on one of the stakeholders or shareholders in Coles, nobody would even know who that person was. He was already wealthy and owned a whole empire. So one time he walks into one of his vineyards and he's like, let me taste some of my grapes in a random vineyard. And the person that was the manager of that estate sees somebody walking up to the grapes and starts beating him. You thief, you're eating the grapes. And Rabbi Tarfon, in a very strange way, allows himself to get beaten up, saying, I don't want to use the power of the Torah. That people say, oh, that's Rabbi Tarfon. And people say, oh, he'll stop hitting me because I'm Rabbi Tarfon. Or he'll stop hitting me because, oh, I'm the owner. Let him do his job and not embarrass him. So, of course, he was kicked out, and that's the story. Let's look at the Mishnah. Last week, it's difficult to learn this week's Mishnah without last week's Mishnah because it's somewhat of a continuation. Last week it said, Hayom katzar v'amlacha merubah. The day is short, the work is much. V'apolima atzelim. The workers are lazy. V'asachar harbeh. The reward is great. Ubal habayit dochek. And the master is pressing. Now, that was a demand for people not to waste their time, to use out their time, and to remember that there's a lot of work that we were created to do. We have so much work to do. We always got to get stuff done when it comes to Judaism, with our families, with Torah study, doing mitzvahs. There's no time for wasting. Okay? So it was demanding of us to use up all of our time. Now, what's going to make you think, when you think about it, the hamlacha merubah, there's lots of work to be done. Actually, there's infinite amount of things that you can be doing, that you can do. It's not just, so your question is, if there's infinite amount of work, why start? Why start? So he answers that question with some encouragement in the next Mishnah, which is important to see. Here he is. So last week is somewhat of the anxiety-provoking Mishnah. Let's go, there's so much to do, let's go, pressure. This one is a different perspective and more encouraging. He would say, Lo alecha amlacha ligmor. Yes, there's tons of work to do, but you don't have to finish everything. That's a relief. But on the other hand, you'd say, okay, if I don't have to do anything, because I'll never finish everything, you'll never, if nothing is perfect, so why start? On the other hand, it says, but you're not free to absolve yourself from it. Okay, so let's stop here. This is really the one of the key points in this Mishnah that he's teaching us over here. It's one of the famous lines in Torah. The Torah is really an infinite resource. The Torah has infinite amount of layers and anecdotes and teachings and lessons that we can learn from every single word within Torah. And that's how you see that till this day, thousands of years and thousands and hundreds of thousands or millions of books later, we're still writing commentaries on the same Torah. And there's commentaries upon the commentaries, etc., infinitely, until infinitum. So you would think that, why would I even bother studying Torah if I could never actually grasp the truth and the true core of the Torah, the true infinity of the Torah? Whatever I do is not even like a drop in the ocean. So therefore he says, yeah, the Torah is infinite. But your job is not to complete it. Your job is to touch infinity. That's our job in this world. We as people have a very unique role, which is, as finite people, being limited in what we're able to understand and do. We are limited by everything, where we can be at one time. We are limited in what we can perceive, what we can learn, what we can see. The very definition of humanity, of a human being, of this physical world, living in this physical world, is that we are ultimately limited. And therefore, that ability of being limited actually has certain powers that come with it. When you take a limited person that studies an infinite Torah, every drop of Torah that we learn, while it may be just one idea, which is a finite idea, it only reveals this. But when you touch into that idea, you're tapping into something infinite. So yeah, you may say, what did I do? For that thing I did. You know, the famous one of the, everyone loves the story of the girl picking up the starfishes, walking along the beach and seeing starfishes. The beach is covered with starfishes along the beach. And she takes up a starfish, there's like, hundreds of thousands, take a starfish and throws them into the ocean. And the man says to the little girl, what are you doing? You're not going to accomplish it. Even if you get 1,000 in the ocean, there'll still be hundreds of thousands left on this beach. They're all up here. So the little girl replies, for that one that I just threw in, it meant everything. That's our job. That's what he's teaching us over here. Yeah, we could think to ourselves, well, I can't study Torah. It's too big. It's too much. I can't become, I'm not a religious Jew. So therefore, if I'm not a religious Jew, I'll just do nothing. I'm not going to, why would I put on tefillin? Because I don't do it every day. Why would I light Shabbat candles? I don't do it every week. No, you have an opportunity today. Each act that we do, would we as physical people do a particular act? When you give somebody $1, you say, but that person needs $1 million to take care of his organization. Or that person needs $100 just to support themselves for food for today. Whatever it is, to cover their bills. What's my $1 going to do? What's my $1 in the morning going to do? No, that $1 counts and everything gets added up. It's really a call to action just to do. And when we do stuff, incredible things happen. Because once we do something, we tap into the infinite. You know the story of the daughter of Pharaoh, of Paro. She comes down to bathe and she sees a basket in a distance, and she hears a baby crying. And she sees that she can't do anything. So what does she do? She stretches out her arm. And the Midrash tells us she stretches out her arm and she can't reach. But because she tried to reach, Hashem outstretched, made her arm stretch further, and she reached it. What does that mean? That means that she put in the effort to do something and God gave her infinite abilities. And the answer is, sometimes we look at situations and we say, I can't, it's impossible for me to do anything. There's nothing that I can achieve in this situation. It's lost. And God says, that's not your role. Your role is not to make sure that the thing is finished and done. That's impossible. The world will never be perfect until Mashiach comes, at least. That's the way God's created. But it's your job to do every single time you have an opportunity to do something, to do that small thing. And when you accumulate all the small things that people have done over the ages, we are in a much better place. You have done a huge amount. And God then takes a little tiny drop and stretches your arm. The Torah is compared to water in the ocean. Like one drop of Torah, you say, oh, it's one drop, it's worthless. I've studied one drop of the Torah. No, but when you've studied that one drop of Torah, yeah, the Torah is infinite. It's like a drop in the ocean, what you've studied, but you've tapped into the whole ocean with that one drop. And God then has the ability to spread it further, and you'll see your little thing having ripple effects in all different areas. The same thing is one little drop starts off with small drops, but every stream starts with a drop and then flows into a river. So this is the power of our Torah study, of our actions. So this is an incredible conclusion to the second chapter of Pirkei Avot. the power of our deeds, because we've spoken about previously in the chapter, and we're going to talk about more, the importance of doing, studying, using our time out wisely, not to say, well, I'm not achieving anything. That's not us to decide. That's not our objective of what am I achieving. Yeah, our objective is to try, to do something. The rest is up to Hashem. That small act will mean everything to that person that you do. May even save a life, and that life will go on for infinity. All right. There's a lot more to talk about on the subject. Of course, it's an infinite subject, this little one, as is everything in Torah. Anybody wants to make any comments before I go on a bit?
How can I resist?
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to argue with you. I agree. A lot of that is universal truths. So those values and principles exist in other belief systems as well. I'm just thinking if Akiva was part of this discussion right now, what he would say. Akiva Quinn, yeah. So he, that's probably what he would say, is that those truths are so highly accepted by many people who are not even Jewish. They're very sound and valuable. I suppose the interesting aspect and with a shiur like this is to look at the uniquely Jewish aspects of those absolute truths as opposed to other belief systems. That's probably the challenge. Even Nike, the sports company, has their main logo on their products is "Just Do It." So those statements, what we also sometimes call motherhood statements, they're completely valid and sound. May I suggest that one possible perspective on this, yes, lots of other belief systems have those statements, but they don't have a structure that encourages people to actually implement it.
I 100% agree with you, in the sense that I think there is definitely a somewhat of a universal, what's the right word? It's somewhat of a universal idea, not unique to Judaism. I agree with that, and I agree with what you've mentioned about the structure. Although I want to add also another point, which is there's many ideas today that you will see and you'll think of them and you'll say, oh, I've heard that in other places. I've looked up some non-Jewish speaker somewhere and I've heard very similar ideas to them. And we would say that we would love to find where's the first source of somebody talking about that. Some ideas that have not been directly, to telling people to kind of put on tefillin, have trickled out to the outside world, and yeah, they have become universal ideas. But I would like to believe, and I don't just believe, I really think it's true, that most of these ideas actually do come from Torah. And that's why we have this structure, because it's not something which is added on, that we've kind of incorporated. This is the very core of what Judaism is. It's making a little dent in an infinite reality.
Yes,
that's not just an idea.
Yeah,
this is the very core of what Judaism is.
The thing is, current society, we often think of society and our civilization, and it's pretty much based on what they call Judeo-Christian values, which is a hard term to explain. But at the end of the day, I think everything goes back to 7 Noahide laws. If we really dig into it and think about our society as such. And remember how in the beginning I was talking to you how it's getting hard with the whole situation, overwhelming, with people not smiling at each other. This is a simple act of just smile and it makes things better. So, it's easy to love the world. It's hard to love your neighbor who parks across your parking spot. It's easy to say, oh, I accept everyone, and then go and see someone who can't grasp for air, and people giving other person look for not pulling mask right up. You know, it's this little subtle sense which coming from respecting each other, which again back to the seven Noahide laws, which I think becoming a cornerstone. And then yes, they develop to many other things, including many other places and religions. Not only taking Christianity, but maybe taking even some knowledge of Abraham's children traveling to places like India, and impact in places like. So you know, I think Judaism actually became the cornerstone of the whole sense. That's how I see it. I don't know. I always sort of go back to seven or high laws of Ten Commandments.
Well said, Margarita. I was going to ask try and put a date on these statements, and the Rabbi Tarfon, Akiva, the contemporaries. Roughly, what time frame were they living in when they wrote down these ideas?
So it would have been just after the Second Temple era. So it would have been approximately 1900 years ago.
Yeah. So you know, after second, so 70 CE, 100 CE, it's in that time frame where there was proto-Christianity starting to develop as well, and those values were starting to be put together and documented.
Yeah. Not introduced but documented. That's a good point. Yes, absolutely. Because introduction happened after the flood. After the flood, we got our seven Noahide laws, which we're supposed to uphold, and people obviously knew them one way or another. As Jews, we have to uphold more, but we are talking about world as whole. So yes, it's interesting point that documentation comes with that introduction to Christianity. Yeah, interesting, very interesting point, Joe.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask, so what the Mishnah we're learning right now, do they quote anywhere in the commentaries, do they say these statements, what posuk in the Torah is it based on?
I don't know if they have sometimes they quote the pasuk and sometimes they don't. So sometimes they will say, well, this is, you'll see, one second. If you'll see even like this one, for example, this is not a Mishnah, but this is what we say at the end of each parak. We say, he says God wanted to give merit to the Jewish people, and therefore he gave us lots of Torah mitzvahs. Therefore it says Hashem desired for his goodness to make the Torah strong, and that's his proof. So sometimes you'll bring a source, and sometimes you'll say this is what we've been taught. Sometimes there is a exact pasuk that is so much indicating that concept, and sometimes it's a concept that we're taught just by our teachers, or something that we discover within the Torah itself, but not necessarily through a direct pasuk. So, for example, if you were to go on a bit and you'd say, Im Torah harba sachar harba. If you learn lots of Torah, you get lots of reward. This is a famous concept in Judaism that we know the Torah talks about, and spoke about it last week, about the concept of reward. Right? If you do study, you will get. And then it says, and your employer, who is God in this case, is believable, is trustworthy, that he will actually pay you back for your work. And then he goes on to say, and know that there is great reward for the righteous in the world to come. All these concepts you can definitely source back to different parts of the Torah. But whether it's one pasuk or sometimes it's a combination of hundreds of psukim or verses that just teach you this concept. All these, at least the last ones, are very much directly concepts from the Torah. The concept of reward for lots of Torah study, and that God will pays us back for our work, and that there's a concept of knowing that there's great reward for the righteous, the people that have worked hard. This is all a famous concept within Judaism, and there's I suppose there's probably too many psukim to quote maybe an exact one, because they all refer to it in different ways. But this concept of reward and on our hard work, connected to what we said in the beginning, it's all connected. He started by telling us, you have to do your part. You see something in me, do your part. Don't say, oh, it's beyond me, I can't. Do your part. If you're successful, good. If not, God will outstretch your arm. So we're told the same thing comes to reward. Sometimes you think, hold on a second, I worked hard. I was never rewarded for my work. So what does he tell us? He says, V'nemon. No. Sometimes you think, hey, I put in so much effort and I was not successful. I never got any reward. Or I'm trying to be such a good Jew, but then why do bad things happen to me? First of all, it could be the way that you're looking at the situation. That's one very strong and probably a most likely option, but we're not going to go there. But also he's telling us that not everything in the Torah is exactly the way you think it should be or the way you expect it to be. Sometimes reward doesn't mean the way you are expecting the reward to come. You know, there's a very sad story of a man by the name of Elisha ben Avot. We spoke about him previously, who later is called Acher. By the rabbis refer to him as Acher, as the other, because he leaves Judaism. He's one of the greatest rabbis in history, but he ends up actually leaving Judaism. And we're told, I spoke about him also on Tuesday night in the shir, when we were talking about thoughts of idolatry and things like that, that because of the things that he had done wrong with his upbringing, eventually led him astray. But he was susceptible to it. And therefore, if there was going to be something that triggered it, they say that it was this particular one of the incidents was this particular incident where he once saw a child being asked by his father to go and get the eggs from a bird and send away the mother bird. Now, two of the mitzvahs that tell us in the Torah that you'll have long life, one is called shiluch hakan, when you send away the mother bird and you take the chicks or the eggs. The other mitzvah is listening to your parents, you're honoring your mother and father, respecting your parents. So this boy goes and listens to his father. He chases away the mother bird, climbs up the tree in the ladder, gets the eggs, and on his way down, he falls and passes away and dies in front of Elisha ben Avot. And Elisha ben Avot says that doesn't make sense. The Torah gives us a promise for long life in two particular instances. What are those two instances? When a person does the mitzvah of shiluch hakan, sending away the mother bird, and respecting the parents. And this boy was doing both of them, and he passed away. So he leaves Judaism. That was kind of like the cherry on the top. That was it. He couldn't take it. And the rabbis said, if he would have only looked a little bit deeper into the teaching and understood that sometimes a long life does not mean for everybody. Some people are not destined to have a long life. And therefore, even if they do certain acts that are meant to change it, it's not going to change that reality. They were created or they were put into this world for a short lifespan. But what it does mean is that if God promises you that you're going to be rewarded for your actions, even if it's a small, tiny thing, you'll get infinite reward. But that reward may not happen in this world. It can happen in the world to come. So that boy that did those double mitzvah, that made him more deserving of long life, the long life is actually more in the world to come. The benefits of long life are more in the world to come than in this world.
And yet his story is immortalized.
What do you mean?
Well, that's part of the reward, is his story is told for infinite, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, but in a negative light.
Is it?
Sense. Well, it was brought up originally in a negative light. Elisha ben Avot says, this is the reason why I'm leaving Judaism, because here you have a boy that's doing mitzvahs that the reward for them, God is promising us a reward. And what does he say? Rabbi Tarfon says, God is faithful and trustworthy that he will pay you back. You will be rewarded when you do good things. You helped somebody on the street and they gave you a shrug and they gave you a cold shoulder and you thought, well, what was the point in that? I'm never going to help somebody again. Because look what they did. I let the guy in and then, I don't know. Nobody else lets me in. I try to help people and then nobody.
It flies in the face of unconditional, like with parenting, as you know. you do parenting really without expectation of reward. There's kind of a
Right.
hope and a trust, but in the end, you love your children and you help them, and completely accepting that it could go one way, and there may be nothing coming back, and that's still all right.
Right. That's a good point. But ultimately, we're told that if you do take care of your children, so we're saying that's the good deed, and then God will pay you back. Or you may say, hold on a second, but look what my children are doing to me now.
Well, the reason I think of the example, Rabbi, is that for many years I was involved with the Association for Children with a Disability, and I helped write some guides, and I took peer support phone calls from parents of kids with special needs. And usually the parent would ring, usually the mother as well, would ring and talk about all the things the kid can't do and the impact on their life. And I would ask them a question: tell me what the child's gifted in. Tell me how this child is adding value to your life, is making people happy. It's like, wow, no one's ever asked me that. I've just never thought of that. I said, sometimes the child is there to make you a better person. Is it working?
100%. 100%. Yeah. And you make me lead on to the topic that I was ultimately hoping that I was hoping that this mission would just be relatively short. I suppose I got a little bit carried away with it. But the main topic I want to talk about is it's telling us that we have limited times, but we're told that the power of the actions that we do, those limitations can have infinite abilities. We're told, for example, like you spoke about someone that has a disability. Sometimes people with a disability, despite their disabilities or in spite, they're able to, or sometimes because of the disability, they're able to have a far greater reach on people than other people. One of the most influential people in the Chabad world today is a guy by the name of Yitzi Horowitz, right? Yitzi Horowitz can't speak, he can't move any part of his body except for his eyes. And he reads he writes a weekly Dvar Torah, which today is probably one of the most, if not the most read weekly Dvar Torahs within Chabad.org and their teachings. They get widely spread. And he writes it just with the movement of his eyes, and apparently it takes him all week to write it. His brain, thank God, but it's such an powerful story that sometimes that ability, or when people read that message, they know the effort that has gone into putting it, into teaching it, and to writing it. It makes it all that more meaningful. And barely anybody was reading his Dvar Torahs, besides from maybe his community before he wasn't. Of course, we don't wish it upon anybody. But there you go. You see an example of somebody that has literally not. You could list what he can do on one hand, almost. For the rest of us, there's thousands of millions of things that we can do. Yet he's having such a great impact on the world. And that's the thing. He's saying, we're saying that as in our limitations, we're talking about now the month of Elul. Elul, we're told, is the month that we as human beings have the ability to transform our lives from one extent to the other. When a person, and I mentioned over here, the advantage of the physical world and the spiritual world, I suppose I'll get into it in another share. But all the Hasidic discussions talk about this power of finitude. The power of being finite allows you to tap into the infinite. When you are a soul without a body and you have infinite powers, you cannot touch the core of godliness, or this essence of godliness. But when you are in a finite body, where your acts are limited and you sit on a Zoom share, you have an infinite capability and you are touching into the infinite God. Much more than Moses sitting in heaven studying with the forefathers.
Can I add a word there? The focus is, I think it's very relevant to this discussion. Is with the so-called restrictions, any restrictions provide the opportunity to focus. With the infinite, the human mind just cannot focus. It's just too much. but restrictions provide that opportunity to focus. What I'm thinking of, the specific example is people with autism, is for most of us with normal brains, neurotypical brains, the world is full of stimuli and interruptions and distractions and so on, but we're able to automatically filter that out. For people with autism, that part of their brain is dysfunctional and they don't have as much control over filtering. So they get overwhelmed in environments that don't overwhelm us. On the other hand, that same dysfunction in their brain gives them laser-like focus and precision. So that when they get into an area that is of interest, they got superhuman abilities. So the disability becomes a super a super strength.
The super strength, right? And as I spoke also on Tuesday night, how the Rabbi spoke about how people with disabilities are mitsuyanim. They're unique because by being limited in one area, that allows them to focus and specialize in other areas. And they actually becoming professionals or specialists in certain ability. If you have a weakness in your hearing, then generally your eyesight will automatically improve, or things like that. Your other abilities will also improve.
Yeah.
So automatically you become much more powerful in other things.
So that's where the restriction
really
it's a super strength. The restriction. There's one example someone shared to me.
What about lockdown restrictions? Is that also a super strength?
Absolutely, it is. I'm getting so much done I would otherwise never have even got near. It's been
I'm glad that that's working out for you.
It is, and it's
total opposite.
But it's the reframing. It's the looking at a situation, saying, okay, how is this an opportunity? It's exactly that's exactly.
I agree with you, 100%. And I have actually seen. Personally, in certain ways, more growth during lockdowns and restrictions than when not. But on the other hand, if you looked at my bare situation, and everyone's in a different situation, but me with all kids at home, for example, getting things done would be something with somewhat of an impossibility to a certain degree in our situation. But at the end of the day, that's when the restrictions you get other things done without even, it's almost like without doing them, they happen sometimes, and there's a lot of truth to that. Exactly. So I think with whichever level of restrictions you have, if you look at them and you take advantage of the situation and the restrictions, you are able to see some type of mechanism of infinity working in your power. Sorry, you were going to say something else?
Oh no, that covers it beautifully. I mean, I can share. I was talking to my cousin's daughter, who's a new mother, and she's been home a long time with an 18-month child, and saying how tough it is. And I said, sure, yes, it is tough. Absolutely, the normal way of life is tough during restrictions, but if you embrace an abnormal way of life and make the best of that. And she said, that's absolutely true, is that this myth about quality time with children, there's no such thing as like really quality time. It's all about quantity time, is that if people forget about the idea of quality time, a short time to engage with the child, it's quality, then the rest of the time you don't spend with them, but instead reframe on there's no substitute for hours and hours and hours with the child, with the good and the bad that comes with that. And that forms a bond for the rest of your life. And so it's tough. It's absolutely tough, but it's also a golden opportunity. Nowadays, parents don't spend typically as much time with their kids as they are at the moment. And they're finding it very difficult because they're not used to it. But if they look at it in a different way, they'll realize just how incredibly valuable it is.
Yeah, easier said than done.
Especially I didn't say it was easy.
Yeah. No. What I'm saying is for parents that are struggling and not getting, and I know from our community, for example, parents that don't have the finances and they are financially really behind because they're not getting work done. And they probably are actually spending great kids, or some other parents that can't get any work done because they're with their kids all day. So it's what I'm saying is you're 100% right, and if a person is willing to has the ability to not get anxious and nervous over the situation, then they certainly can reap the benefits of these type of. But not everyone has that ability
It's not only
or that
that.
mind frame.
Children learn so much from teachers and interaction with each other that can't be taken out of the whole scene either. And this constant instability that children have, you can't say it's not making them anxious. You know, it's ridiculous because one day we say to a child, yes, you're going to school, and the next day you can't go to school. 1 second you can have a friend, and next second you can't have a birthday party because not everyone wants Zoom. So yes, absolutely, there's such thing as quantity of time, and I'm all for women having the choice to stay at home. Not only you have to choose career, and if you're useless, you stay at home, you know, and I'm all for many other choices. But children, and not only children, we need interaction with each other. Otherwise, we wouldn't make up all the social media and Zooms and other things because we're suffering from it. So definitely we have to make the best out of situation, but at the same token, we cannot neglect this lack of pure human communication, which we all need. I mean,
100%.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, there's not, as we say, we don't wish upon anybody to have any type of um, restrictions or disabilities or limitations. But at the end of the day, if you do find yourself in it, the best thing to do is to try to make it the best of the situation. But certainly not to try to encourage that. You know, so we hope and we pray that we will somehow get over all these issues. And it's definitely, I agree with you, definitely not healthiest for our children in most cases. I don't think it is healthy for our children, and I don't know if it's healthy for the parents as well, because it's good to first of all quality time, but to say to people, okay, well, we're going to do lockdown, at least you could have quality time. Sometimes that quality time is actually not quality time. It's time filled with anxiety and anger and domestic abuse in all forms and matters, and financial worry, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's definitely not anything that should be encouraged and be accepted. But at this point, you know, we've got to just hope and pray that somehow they'll be able to get the virus under control, or themselves under control, or whoever it is that has to become under control, that we can get to some level of normality that is actually a healthy way forward. But getting back to our shir, I think that no matter what the situation is, we have to do our part. And that's the lesson that we have to conclude this chapter with. And I'm just going to finish off the last words. We always, every chapter in Pirkei Avot, we always conclude with those words that I mentioned earlier. So this is our siyum, our conclusion of chapter 2. We have now completed 2 chapters of Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Hanania ben Akash Omer Ratzak Kadosh Baruch Hu Lezakas Israel Aficha Chiyuv Lehem Torah Mitzvah Shneimar Hashem Chafetz Leman Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir. I forgot to share my screen, so this we could say it in English. Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha said, the Holy One blessed be, he wished to make people of Israel meritorious, and therefore he gave them the Torah and mitzvahs in an abundant measure. Why did he give us so many Torah mitzvahs? Because he wanted to give us more opportunities to do good. And every little opportunity that we do, we tap into the infinite. He wanted us to get, but we put on tefillin once. Oh, I've tapped into infinite. I did it yesterday. Yeah, but you can do it again and tap into infinite again. Would you choose not to if you made $1 million yesterday and you could easily make another $1 million the next day, would you say no? Well, you might, but that's a little bit everybody each to their own, because it says that the Lord desired for the sake of his Israel's righteousness to make the Torah great and glorious. And please God, we should be merit to learn much more together.
Amen. Chazak.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thanks for joining.
thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I hope to see you all in person soon.
Amen.
Really
Okay.
It'll be great.
See you, my friends. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. See you.